Chapter 1. The Trouble with Coming Home. So here's the thing about Eminence, Missouri. It's the kind of town that swallows you whole if you let it. Not in a bad way, exactly. More like the way the Current River swallows you when you step off a canoe at Blue Spring. Cold, and clear, and completely, shockingly alive. You go under, and when you come up you're laughing because what else can you do? I grew up here. I've guided tourists through these rivers for 4 years. I've watched people from Kansas City and St. Louis and Chicago step off their rental shuttles with their brand new REI gear and their deer-in headlights expressions. And I have never once gotten tired of the moment they hit the water and realize that all that expensive equipment doesn't matter one bit. The Ozarks will humble you regardless. Point is, I know this town. I know its rhythms and its people, and the way the fog sits on the river in the mornings, like the whole place is keeping a secret. I know which trails flood after 3 days of rain, and which ones are passable, and which ones will absolutely eat you alive. I know which locals to trust and which ones to smile at, real wide, while backing slowly toward the exit. What I did not know, on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday in May, was that Nash Blackwood was back. For good. I found out the way you find out everything in a town of 800 people. Lorraine Pacheco told me at the gas station. Lorraine is 73, 5 feet tall, and has the energy of a golden retriever who just discovered a squirrel. She was loading a case of water into her truck when I pulled up, and she dropped it. Just let it fall, the second she saw me. Bailey O'Connell. The way she said it, you'd think I was the answer to a prayer. You heard? I hadn't heard anything. I was running on 4 hours of sleep and my second gas station coffee, and I had a group of 6 accountants from Columbia showing up at 8 for a float trip. I was not equipped for whatever expression Lorraine was wearing. Nash Blackwood bought the old Clear Creek building? She said it the way you'd announce a natural disaster. Or a miracle. With Lorraine, it was sometimes hard to tell. He's turning it into an outfitter store. Outdoor gear, river supplies, all of it. Opens in 3 weeks. I said something like, huh. What I was thinking was considerably more complicated. Nash Blackwood. Of all the names to land in my Tuesday morning, Nash Blackwood, who I had known since we were kids tearing around this town, who had spent the better part of our teenage years being simultaneously the most aggravating person in my orbit and the one I was most aware of at any given moment, which, for the record, I had never admitted to anyone, including myself, for longer than 30 seconds at a stretch. Nash, who left for college in Columbia 8 years ago and came back every summer like a bad penny that you inexplicably looked forward to finding. Nash, who I had once told, at the age of 17, that he was the most arrogant human being I'd ever had the misfortune to encounter, and who had grinned at me like I'd paid him a compliment. Isn't that something? Lorraine was still talking. You two will be practically in the same business now. Competition. We're not in the same business, I said. I guide trips. He's selling gear. Your groups need gear, don't they? They rent from Eminence Adventures. Paul handles the equipment rentals. Lorraine made a face. It was a specific face, a sort of pursed lip, sideways squint, that I recognized as her polite way of expressing an opinion she decided not to share. About Paul, probably. Lorraine had made that face about Paul Sanders approximately once every conversation for the past 6 months. Well, she said, picking up her water case, I'm sure it'll all work out fine. The way she said fine suggested she thought it absolutely would not. I should tell you about Nash, I guess, since he's going to be relevant. Nash Blackwood is, look, there's no diplomatic way to put this, unreasonably good-looking. Has been since approximately the age of 15, which is honestly unfair given that I spent those same years being a frizzy-haired disaster in rubber boots. He's tall, broad across the shoulders in the way that comes from actually using your body and not just posing at a squat rack, with sandy hair that gets lighter in summer, and those eyes blue, the kind of blue the river gets in late afternoon, that have the extremely inconvenient quality of making you feel like whatever you're saying is the most interesting thing he's heard all week. Even when he's arguing with you, especially when he's arguing with you actually. We grew up on the same block. Went to the same school. He was 2 years ahead of me, which meant he was 2 years ahead of me in everything. Height, confidence, the ability to make other people laugh. He had this way of walking into a room and immediately knowing where everyone was in it, this easy awareness that I spent a lot of time pretending not to notice, because noticing felt dangerous. We bickered constantly. About everything. Whose turn it was to use the swimming hole, whether the 11-point or the Current was the better river. Whether Die Hard was a Christmas movie, it is, and he was wrong. I gave as good as I got mostly, though there were moments, and I'm not proud of this, where he'd say something or do something and I'd lose my entire train of thought for a second, just misplace it completely, and have to scramble to find it again before he noticed. He probably noticed. The thing that complicated everything, not that things needed to be more complicated, was the rescuing. See, I have a slight tendency, according to people who love me and feel entitled to have opinions about my life choices, to leap into situations before fully thinking them through. I prefer to think of it as being responsive. The universe doesn't pause while you make a risk assessment. Nash Blackwood had been in my vicinity during 3 separate instances of what other people called reckless behavior, and what I called doing what needed to be done. Instance 1. I was 12, he was 14. I was trying to rescue a bird's nest that had fallen into a drainage ditch during a storm. I made it 2/3 of the way down the embankment before the mud gave out. Nash hauled me out by my wrist, got us both filthy, and then stood there with mud on his face, telling me I was going to give him a heart attack before he was old enough to drive. Instance 2. I was 23, he was home for summer, I had spotted a dog, somebody's hound, clearly, swept up in the current during a flash flood on the Jack's Fork. I went in. The dog was fine. I was less fine, briefly, until Nash appeared on the bank with a throw rope and considerably more upper body strength than the situation strictly required. He didn't yell at me about it. He just stood there afterward in the rain with that expression on his face, the one I couldn't quite read, and said, "You know, most people just call animal control." And I said, "Animal control takes 20 minutes. And he looked at me for a long moment and said, "Yeah," like that answered something. And then he went back to school 2 weeks later, and I didn't see him again until Christmas. Instance 3 was the kitten. Mrs. Alvarez's kitten, specifically, which had gotten itself approximately 40 feet up an oak tree in her backyard, and was expressing its displeasure at a volume that violated multiple noise ordinances. Mrs. Alvarez was 81, and not suited for tree climbing. I was 26, and, as established, not great at walking away from things that needed doing. I was maybe 15 feet up when the branch moved wrong and I grabbed the one above me instead of coming down like a reasonable person. The kitten was in my hoodie pocket. Nash had apparently been walking past on the street, heard the commotion, cut through the yard, and stood at the base of the tree staring up at me with an expression that managed to be both thoroughly exasperated and deeply fond at the same time. "Don't you dare tell me to come down," I said. "I was going to ask if you wanted me to spot you." "I'm fine." "The tree disagrees," he talked me down, literally step by step, hands on my waist the last 6 feet, which I absolutely did not think about later. The kitten was completely unbothered. Mrs. Alvarez gave us both lemon cake. 2 weeks later, Nash went back to wherever he'd been that summer, and I went back to my life, and that was that. Except now, he was back. For good. And he'd bought a building 3 blocks from my workplace, so, fine. Chapter 2. Paul, gear, and other things I should probably worry about. My employer, Paul Sanders, was the kind of man who filled a doorway when he stood in it, not in a reassuring way, in the way of someone who has learned, over a long time, that taking up space works. He'd bought Eminence Adventures 5 years ago from old Terry Hobbs, who'd started it in the 90s and wanted to retire to Branson and play golf. Paul had money from somewhere. Commercial real estate in Springfield, someone had said once, and he'd put it into the business with the focused attention of a man who was very good at acquiring things. He was good at the business part, I'll give him that. The website was professional, the equipment was maintained, the booking calendar was always full from April through October. He hired good guides, me, Danny Reyes, Marcus Webb, and he let us run our trips the way we knew how, which is the fastest way to make guides happy and loyal. The problem started around 8 months ago, roughly around the time, looking back, that Paul decided I was something he wanted to acquire too. It didn't start as anything I could name. A hand on my shoulder that lingered too long, comments about my appearance in front of clients. Not inappropriate exactly, but pointed. Bailey's the prettiest guide on the river, in a tone that made the clients laugh and made me want to step backward. A text after a long trip day that was friendly enough in its wording, but sent at 10:30 at night for no reason that made sense. I'm a practical person. I dealt with it practically. I changed where I stood in the office. I kept my phone on the other side of my apartment after 9. I found reasons to have Danny or Marcus nearby when I was doing end-of-day reports. And when Paul, 3 months in, said over end-of-day paperwork that he'd like to take me to dinner sometime, stated in a tone that suggested this was a foregone conclusion, I looked up from the booking sheet and said clearly and pleasantly, "I appreciate the thought, but I don't date people I work with. It's a hard rule." Rules change, he said. Mine don't, I said, and I smiled, and I meant it as a door closing, and I thought that was that. It was not entirely that. He'd asked again in January. Once in February. The February one came with a gift. A nice one. A quality trail knife in a leather sheath that I thanked him for, set on his desk and never touched again. He'd gotten the message on that one at least. But there was still the shoulder touching, still the comments in front of clients, still the late texts. And recently, this was new. This made the back of my neck prickle in a way I didn't love. The casual mentions of things he'd seen me do on my days off. Running the lower jacks. Stopping at the diner on Thursday morning. Nothing that couldn't be explained by small-town coincidence. Because Eminence was genuinely that small. I told myself I had it handled. I was 29 and capable, and had been navigating difficult river conditions since I was old enough to hold a paddle. I could handle a man who didn't take no as graciously as he should. I mostly believed myself. Clear Creek Outfitters opened on a Thursday. I know because I was at the diner across the street from my standing Thursday breakfast. Eggs, wheat toast, the coffee that June makes in a vintage percolator and refuses to upgrade. And I watched Nash Blackwood carry boxes through the front door for 45 minutes. He was wearing a faded gray Henley with the sleeves pushed to his elbows and jeans that had actual mud on them, which, look, I'm just reporting facts here, was a good look. An extremely unfair look for 7:30 on a Thursday. He moved with that easy, unself-conscious efficiency of someone who's done physical work their whole life, and twice he paused in the doorway to talk to people who stopped on the sidewalk, and both times he laughed at whatever they said, head tilting back slightly, and I watched it happen from behind my coffee cup like the world's most pathetic birdwatcher. June materialized at my elbow to refill my coffee. "Boy's back," she observed. Looking good. Is he? I hadn't noticed. June gave me the look that 60-year-old women who've known you your whole life give you when you say something profoundly stupid. It required no words. It was just eyes. "I've got a float group at 9, I said. "Sure you do, sweetheart." I left a generous tip and did not look back at the store as I walked to my truck. This was a deliberate and mature decision, and I stand by it completely. I made it exactly 120 feet from the diner's door before Nash said, "Bailey O'Connell." And there it was, my name in his voice, look, he had a voice that did things. Low and easy, with that particular Ozark vowel that softened without drawling, and he said my name the way he'd always said it, like it was 2 words he liked saying. I turned around. He was standing on the sidewalk maybe 10 feet away, hands in his pockets, and he was grinning at me, not the smug grin, the one I'd been filing under, aggravating, since we were teenagers. Something warmer than that, something that landed differently than it used to. Nash. Very calm, very adult, genuinely impressive performance, if I do say so. He crossed the distance between us with that unhurried ease he'd always had, the kind of walk that said he had nowhere to be that mattered more than right here. And then he did something unexpected. He stopped closer than he needed to for a sidewalk conversation, closer than the social math of former childhood sparring partners would typically require, and looked down at me with those eyes doing the thing where they made you feel like the interesting thing in the room. "You look exactly the same," he said. "You look older." That landed, and he laughed. A real one, surprised out of him. And the warmth of it did something complicated in my chest that I was absolutely not going to examine before 9 a.m. "I heard you're guiding for Paul Sanders." 4 years. "Yeah?" He nodded, but something shifted in his expression. Subtle. The grin didn't go anywhere, but underneath it, something got quiet and attentive. "How's that working out?" "Fine." And then, because I'd been trained since birth to fill silences, "Business is good, lots of bookings this season." Good. He was still watching me in that way he had. "Your groups'll probably need equipment. Rentals, supplies. I'd love to work with you if Paul's open to it." I could not immediately imagine Paul being open to it, but that was a bridge to cross later. That's a conversation to have with him. "Sure." A pause. Then, "You should come see the store. When we're open, I want your opinion on the kayak inventory." "Why my opinion?" "Because you know more about reading water in this stretch of river than anyone else I've met, and I'm putting together a rental fleet and I don't want to screw it up." It was a reasonable, professional thing to say. That's what made it confusing. It was entirely reasonable and entirely professional, and there was absolutely no reason for my brain to be doing what it was doing, which was approximately Oh, I'll think about it, I said. That's more than I expected. He stepped back, giving me space, and the easy grin was back. Good to see you, Bailey. You too, I said, and meant it more than I wanted to. I made it to my truck and sat there for a moment with my hands on the wheel. Nash Blackwood. Back in Eminence, 3 blocks from my workplace. Asking my opinion on kayaks. My float group at 9 was going to be real lucky I had a river to focus on. Quick request. If you find yourself enjoying the narrative, please hit that like button. It really helps me know that I have hit the mark with these stories. If you would like to leave a location suggestion for future stories, drop it in the comments. Chapter 3. The store, the kayaks, and the space between. I went to Clear Creek Outfitters on Saturday. For professional reasons. That's my story and I'm keeping it. The store was good, was the thing. You could tell immediately that Nash had put real thought into it. The layout made sense, moving from clothing and basics near the front to technical gear in the back, with a whole section dedicated to float trip supplies that was organized in a specific order you'd actually need things, from river maps to dry bags to throw ropes. The kayak and canoe inventory was displayed along the east wall, which caught the morning light through the big windows, and they were quality boats, a mix of recreational and touring models that covered the range of skill levels you'd actually see on the current. I stood in front of them for a while, doing the thing where you look at boats the way other people look at art. You're making me nervous, Nash said from behind me. You should be nervous. You've got 3 Perception Swifties in a size that's going to be a problem for anyone over 6 feet. They're popular sellers. For flat water. Your rental clients are going to hit Welch Spring, and they're going to have a bad time in a Swiftie. He came to stand beside me, close enough that I could smell the combination of cedar and river damp that seemed to be just part of him, like it was built in, and studied the kayaks with his arms crossed, considering. So what would you put there instead? Old Town Saranac, probably. Better primary stability, more forgiving in mild current, still easy to paddle. Or the Wilderness Systems Pungo if you want something that tracks a little better for the longer floats. A pause. Then, can you write that down? I looked at him. He looked back, completely sincere. You're actually asking me. Bailey, I just drove to 3 outdoor expos and spent 2 weeks building out an inventory, and you spotted a problem in 90 seconds. Yes, I'm asking you. There was something about that. The directness of it, the complete absence of ego, that got under my guard a little. The Nash in my memory had always been confident to the point of smugness, and there were still flashes of it. But this version had something else layered on top, something that felt like actual steadiness. I took the notepad he offered and wrote down 4 models with notes. He read over my shoulder, which meant he was standing close enough that I could feel the warmth of him, which I noticed in the completely neutral way that a person notices temperature. Okay, he said. I'm going to call the distributor Monday. Can I buy you coffee? I have a group at noon. It's 9:30. Prep takes time. He made a sound that might have been a very quiet laugh, except I wasn't looking at him, so I can't confirm that. Bailey. What? I'm going to be in this town for the rest of my foreseeable future. You can't avoid me indefinitely. I'm not avoiding you. I'm managing my schedule. Right. Definitely laughing now. 1 coffee, we can talk about the rest of the kayak situation. The kayak situation was a completely legitimate professional concern that I had raised myself. There was absolutely no reason to say no to discussing it over coffee. 0 reasons. None. 1 coffee, I said. His smile, and this was the unfair part, this was the thing I was going to have to figure out how to deal with, went all the way to his eyes. June's Diner again, because it was the closest, and because June's coffee was actually good. We sat at the counter instead of a booth, which felt marginally safer for reasons I couldn't entirely articulate. Side by side meant less direct eye contact. That was a plus. So, Nash said, wrapping both hands around his mug, what happened to that thing you were doing with the outdoor education nonprofit? The one you were starting before I left last time. Right. He'd known about that. We'd talked about it briefly 2 summers ago in a conversation I'd filed under Random Encounters with Nash Blackwood, because that was the safest place for it. It's still a thing I want to do. Just not yet. Paul's not interested in the programming angle. He's pure recreation focus, which is fine. So I've been sitting on the grant applications until I figure out the structure. What structure? Who runs it? Where it's housed? Whether I could actually make it sustainable, or whether I'd be back to guiding in 2 years anyway. Nash was quiet for a moment, turning his mug in slow circles on the counter. What kind of programming? At-risk youth, mostly. River skills as a therapeutic framework. There's research on it. The combination of physical challenge and natural environment as an intervention for kids dealing with trauma and anxiety. ISHE did not. She said it on this day in his store.t works. I've seen it work. I stopped, because I'd gotten into it and I didn't mean to. Sorry, that's a whole thing. I know. I've been watching you think about it for a long time. That landed oddly. I turned to look at him. He was watching me with that quiet, attentive expression, the one that wasn't the grin, the one that was harder to deflect. You'd run it well, he said simply. You're the best guide on this river, and you actually care about it in the right way. Nash. I've been watching you with clients for years, Bailey. When you get a scared first-timer and you talk them through it, you don't just get them through, you get them to love it. That's not a skill most people have. I looked back at my coffee. The back of my throat was doing something I didn't want to examine in a public diner with June, watching from the other end of the counter. Are you running some kind of long con? I said. Because I should warn you, flattery is not going to get me to change my mind on you needing to get those Swifties exchanged. He laughed. It broke the moment in a way I was grateful for. Completely separate issue. Though since you brought it up, how do I get on your good side for inventory consultations on an ongoing basis? You can't afford me. Try me. I opened my mouth. Closed it. He was grinning now. The warm one, not the smug one. And I was losing the thread of the conversation in exactly the way I'd promised myself I wouldn't. I'll think about it, I said, which was apparently my go-to for Nash-related questions. You said that earlier. And I'm still thinking. Fair enough. He stood, left money on the counter despite my protest, and then did the thing again. That thing where he stopped closer than necessary, and looked down at me. For what it's worth, I'm glad I'm back. He said it like he meant exactly what the words said and not anything more complicated, and he walked back toward the store, and I sat there with my coffee going cold, and June appearing at my elbow with the pot and the look. Don't, I said. Wasn't going to say a word, she said, and refilled my cup. Chapter 4. The Thing Paul Did on Thursday. End-of-day Thursdays at Eminence Adventures meant paperwork, booking reconciliation, equipment logs, trip reports for the insurance carrier, and it usually took about an hour if I focused, and closer to 2 if Donnie was in the office, because Donnie Reyes is my best friend, and we are constitutionally incapable of being in the same room without talking. Donnie was not in the office this particular Thursday. Marcus had the late shuttle run. It was just me and the stacks of paper and the sound of the river through the open window, which was usually enough. Paul came in around 6:30. I heard his truck, a black Silverado that he drove with the particular confidence of a man who wanted you to notice it, and then the back door, and then his boots on the floor, and I kept my eyes on the booking sheet because I was in the middle of a reconciliation, and also because keeping my eyes on paperwork was a reasonable boundary that I had established. Good float today? He leaned against the doorframe of the office. Casual. He was good at casual. The group from Jefferson City. Yeah, they did well. Full group? 6 adults. 1 kid who turned out to be a natural. His dad cried a little. It was a good day. He made an approving sound and came into the office. Not his office, technically. The shared office, the one with the desk where we did route planning, and sat in the chair across from mine. Which was fine. Normal. He sat there sometimes. Except tonight, he pulled the chair around to my side of the desk. I looked up. Equipment log? He said, reaching past me for the binder, his arm crossing my space. I need to check the canoe inventory against what we ordered. He didn't take the binder. His hand landed on top of mine on the desk. There was a beat, one of those beats where the room gets very still, and then I moved my hand out from under his in a single deliberate motion and set it in my lap. Paul, Bailey. His voice was even, like mine. Like we were discussing inventory. I think we've talked about this enough times that we're both clear. I think about you. He said it simply, like stating a fact about the weather. I think you know that. What I know is that I've been clear with you, multiple times, and I need that to be enough. Something moved across his face. Not anger exactly. Something slower. I own this business, Bailey. I can make things a lot easier for you here. The nonprofit thing. Grants are hard to get. I know people in Springfield. I put my pen down. Set it down carefully, because my hands wanted to do something else entirely. That sounds like something I'd want you to take back, I said, quiet and clear. He held my gaze for a moment, and then something in him retreated. Not all the way, not far enough. but enough that he stood, picked up the equipment binder, and said in his regular business voice, "Have the trip reports on my desk by Monday." "They're always on your desk by Monday." He left. The back door. The truck. I sat there for a minute, with my heart doing something loud and unhelpful, and the river going on outside like nothing had happened. Which, the river's not wrong. Things happen. You get back in the current. But my hands were not entirely steady when I picked the pen back up. And I thought about the way he'd said, "I know people in Springfield." And I thought about the grant applications I'd been nurturing for 2 years, and I had a very specific, very cold feeling that went beyond the usual "this is uncomfortable" of the past several months into something I didn't have a clean name for yet. I thought about telling Donnie. I would tell Donnie, just not tonight. Tonight I was going to finish the paperwork and go home and feed my dog, a 3-legged heeler named Riptide, rescue operation courtesy of a flooded drainage culvert behind the grocery store. No, I am not seeing a pattern, and not think about Paul Sanders at all. This plan lasted until I pulled out of the parking lot and drove, on autopilot apparently, directly past Clear Creek Outfitters, which still had a light on inside, and saw Nash's silhouette through the window moving equipment around at 7 p.m. on a Thursday. I kept driving and thought about things I couldn't name for a long time after that. Chapter 5. The Gear Consultant and Other Bad Ideas. I told Danny on Friday. Danny's response was measured, thoughtful, and took exactly 4 seconds. "We're reporting him." To who? Whoever you report a boss who's treating your professional future like a bargaining chip for a date he's not getting. It's more complicated than... It's really not. Donnie's voice had the particular quality of a woman who grew up with 4 brothers and developed early opinions about men who push. "Bailey." He mentioned the grants. "He's not being a hopeful guy with a crush anymore, he's leveraging." I knew she was right. I'd known since the moment he said it. I also knew that reporting Paul Sanders to... What? The Chamber of Commerce? There was no HR department. It was his business. And I loved this job. I was good at this job, and the season was just starting, and there were clients who'd specifically booked with me, and... "I hear you thinking yourself in circles," Danny said. "I'm being practical." "You're being scared." "Which is okay, it's allowed. Just call it that." I made us both coffee. Her apartment, her good beans, the French press that I'd given her for Christmas, and we sat on her porch above the river and listened to the water for a while. Nash Blackwood asked me to consult on his kayak inventory, I said, which was completely unrelated to the previous topic. Donnie turned her head very slowly. Nash Blackwood. "He's setting up rentals. He wanted input on the models." "And you said?" "I said I'd think about it." Bailey O'Connell. She said my name with a reverence usually reserved for either prayer or exasperation. "The man has been in love with you since you were 17 years old, and you told him he was the most arrogant person you'd ever met. He has not been." I stopped. "How do you know what I said to him when I was 17? Eminence has 800 people in it, honey. Everyone knows everything." She sipped her coffee. "He's back. He's staying. And he asked your opinion on boats. It's a professional consultation. The man could call a distributor. He doesn't need your consultation." She let that sit. Then, "He wants a reason to talk to you." I stared at the river. A heron landed on a rock downstream, elegant and unhurried, and stood there like it owned everything it could see. "The timing is terrible," I said. "Timing is always terrible, that's why it's timing. I have a situation at work that I need to figure out. Yes, and separately, completely separately, a man you've been not thinking about for 10 years has moved back to your town and is asking about boats. You're not helping." "Babe, I'm helping more than you know. I went to Clear Creek Outfitters that afternoon, for professional reasons." Again, Nash was unboxing river maps when I walked in. Big, regional topographic maps, the laminated kind that can get soaked and still be readable. And he looked up when the bell over the door rang, and something in his face went immediately, quietly pleased in a way he didn't seem to be trying to hide. "It did things to my equilibrium. I'm documenting this. The Swifties are gone," he said. "I talked to the distributor this morning. The Pungo's a better boat. The distributor also said Wilderness Systems has a longer lead time, but..." He held up a hand. "Worth it. You were right." "You were right." From Nash Blackwood was not something my nervous system had an established protocol for. I did a fairly convincing impression of someone who receives compliments gracefully and went to look at the map selection, which was good, detailed, well-sourced. "These are quality," I said. I've been sourcing them for 3 months. The current river section is from a cartographer in Rolla who's been mapping these waterways for 30 years. He came to stand beside me. There he was again, in my peripheral space, warm and certain and not making any kind of move, just being close, and spread one of the maps on the counter. Can you mark the tricky sections, the ones tourists think they can handle and can't? I leaned over the map. He leaned over the map. Our shoulders were about 4 inches apart. The drop below Rocky Falls is the one that gets people, I said. It reads as smaller than it is from the upstream side. I know that one. I went over it wrong the summer I was 19 and couldn't tell my mom what happened for 3 months. I looked at him. He was grinning at the memory, a little rueful, and there was something so, I don't know, so real about it, the 19-year-old version of him going over that drop wrong and keeping it from his mother, that I laughed before I could stop it. No one needs to know that story, I agreed. The river keeps its secrets. He handed me a red marker. Mark the map. So I did. I bent over the map and marked 3 sections with notes, and Nash watched over my shoulder with his arms braced on either side of the counter, and at some point, I can't tell you exactly when, his right hand moved to rest on the counter approximately 2 inches from mine. Not touching, just there. I finished marking the 3rd section and straightened up, which brought me roughly face level with his shoulder, which was right there because he hadn't moved, and we were in this small contained space between the counter and the wall of maps, and he was looking down at me with an expression I couldn't do anything useful with. Nash? Bailey? Are you? I stopped, started again. What are you doing? He didn't pretend not to understand the question. I'm figuring out if you're going to bolt. I don't bolt. No, he said. You climb trees and jump into flood currents. You don't bolt. But you also don't. He paused, chose his words with unusual care. You make it hard for people to get close, Bailey. You always have. And I'm not sure if that's about me specifically or just, this is a professional consultation, I said. A beat. Then, right. He straightened up, giving me room, and I breathed for what felt like the first time in several minutes. The maps are great, I said. You should put the Rocky Falls note on the handout you give renters. I will. He collected the map with steady hands. Thanks for coming in. Sure. I walked to the door, stopped with my hand on the frame because, I don't know. Because the river keeps its secrets, but apparently I'm not very good at keeping mine. You're not wrong, I said without turning around. About the getting close thing. I didn't wait to see his face, but I heard him, a quiet exhale, almost a laugh, and I carried that sound with me all the way home. Chapter 6, The Supplier Meeting and Everything That Went Wrong After. 2 weeks went by, good weeks mostly. A school group from Rolla for a 3-day float camp that left me sunburned and hoarse from shouting safety instructions and completely exhausted in the best possible way. A solo kayaker from Chicago who'd done the Boundary Waters and wanted to compare notes. A family of 5 from St. Louis who'd never touched a paddle in their lives and left 5 days later talking about coming back every summer. Paul was professional. Correct. He all said the right things in client briefings and signed off on my route plans and delivered the trip reports to the Springfield insurance contact without comment. He was doing the thing that controlling men do when they're regrouping, pulling back to a baseline, letting you breathe, waiting for you to interpret the space as resolution. I was not interpreting it as resolution. I was watching it the way you watch a section of river that's gone quiet. You've been on enough water to know that quiet doesn't always mean safe. Nash and I had fallen into something that I couldn't quite name. Not friendship exactly. We'd been something like friends before, or adjacent to it, and this felt different. More deliberate. He called the outfitter supply question that actually needed my input. Type of helmet for mixed beginner-intermediate rentals, best throw rope length for the reach distances on the current, whether his first aid kit contents made sense for a multi-day float scenario. And I answered, sometimes by text, sometimes in person, and there was always this charge underneath the professional exchange, like current under still water. He was patient. That was the word for it. Nash Blackwood, who I'd clocked at 17 as confident to the edge of arrogant, had turned into someone who could wait, who didn't push, who showed up consistently and let me set the pace and didn't make me feel stupid for the pace I was setting. It was more unsettling than if he'd just been pushy about it. Pushiness I know how to deal with. I was thinking about all of this on a Saturday morning when I stopped at Clear Creek for a water filter. Mine had cracked, and I had a solo float planned for the afternoon and walked in to find Nash in a meeting. Not just a meeting. A meeting with Paul Sanders. They were at the back of the store, near the display kayaks, and Paul's body language was the particular configuration it took when he was establishing territory. Legs planted wide, chin slightly up, that specific stillness that wasn't calm at all. Nash was leaning against the kayak rack with his arms crossed, and he was looking at Paul with an expression I hadn't seen on him before, neutral in the wrong way. The way the sky gets neutral before weather. They both turned when the bell rang. Paul's face did something complicated when he saw me. Nash's went quiet, watchful. "Bailey." Paul's voice was the professional one. "Just talking to your neighbor here about supplier relationships." I had a water filter to pick up. That was all I needed to do. Nash was proposing, Paul said, and there was something in the word proposing that made it sound larger than it should. That Eminence Adventures share equipment rental clientele with Clear Creek for a referral arrangement. "It's a pretty standard arrangement in outdoor rec markets," Nash said. His eyes were on me, and there was a question in them. "You okay?" "It's not an arrangement I'm interested in," Paul said pleasantly. "Silence. The kind that has texture." "Okay," Nash said. "Bailey handles our equipment standards," Paul continued, and I felt the sentence coming before it arrived. "So you'd need to run anything like that past me first." I handled equipment standards the same way I handled my own lunch order, which was to say I was fully autonomous in it and Paul had never previously claimed otherwise. The statement was decorative. A little flag being planted. Nash was still watching me, still quiet in that particular way. "I'll grab the filter," I said to the room at large. "I've got a float this afternoon." I found the filter section. I paid for it at the counter, where Nash appeared beside me a few minutes later, Paul having apparently left via the back parking lot. "Sorry?" Nash said quietly. "You don't have anything to be sorry for. He came in 20 minutes ago. He framed it as a business conversation." A pause. I don't think that's what it was. I looked at the filter in my hands. "No." "Bailey." He said my name the way he said it sometimes. Careful, like it mattered. "Is everything okay at that job?" "It's fine." Old reflex. "That word again." I looked up. He was watching me with that quiet attention, and for a second I wanted to tell him all of it, the months of it, the hand on mine, the Grant comment, the specific chill of knowing that someone with professional power over you has decided to frame that power as affection. I wanted to put it down somewhere, the weight of it, just for a minute. "I handle it," I said instead. "I always handle it." That's not the same as it being fine. No, it wasn't. I knew that. "I'll see you Tuesday," I said. "About the first aid kit question." He let me go. He always let me go. That was the problem, a little. The he let me go so easily made me want to stay. Chapter 7. The fundraiser, the dance floor, and losing my mind completely. The Eminence Summer Kickoff fundraiser happens every June. Benefit for the volunteer fire department, held at the Elks Lodge, which is the only building in town large enough to hold the whole town at once. There's a band, there's food from the VFW auxiliary, there's a silent auction of things people from Eminence donate, which one year included a half cord of firewood, and a promising offer of 3 months of guitar lessons from a man who may or may not have been a reliable guitar teacher. I go every year. Everyone goes. The volunteer fire department is how we do things here. Donnie and I arrive together, which is our default setting for events where we might need moral support, or someone to flag down when we want to leave. The lodge smelled like all lodge buildings everywhere, wood and old carpet, and the particular combination of food and community events that is essentially the scent of a small town proving it's still alive. The band was good this year, a trio from Current River with a fiddle player who clearly had opinions about how fiddles should be played, and those opinions were correct. Half the town was on the small dance floor by the time we got our drinks. Nash was there. Of course he was. He was talking to the Hendersons, a farming family I'd known since childhood, and he'd made some upgrade in his Friday night presentation. Clean jeans, dark blue shirt with the sleeves rolled, and he'd done something with his hair that was still entirely casual and also extremely distracting. I looked for approximately 1 second, and then redirected my attention to the silent auction table, where there was a very interesting item that was a hand-thrown pottery mug, and I was going to look at it for a while. "He's been watching the door since we got here," Donnie said helpfully. "The mug is $25 to start." I'm just saying, the craftsmanship on this handle is really... Bailey. I turned around. Nash was approximately 4 feet away and approaching, the Hendersons having released him. He had a beer and an expression that was warm and easy, and landed exactly where I'd been trying to not let things land all month. "O'Connell," he said. "Blackwood." Donnie evaporated. "She does this. I don't know how she does it. She's 5'9" and not a small person, but she can simply cease to be in the immediate vicinity when she judges it necessary. I have never successfully stopped her." "Good band," Nash said. "The fiddle player went to school in Nashville for 2 years. It shows." We stood there with our drinks, listening to the fiddle player demonstrate what 2 years in Nashville does for a fiddle player, and it was easy. That was the thing about Nash that I kept running into, the ease of it. The way conversation with him didn't require effort the way it did with most people. It was more like going into a current you trusted, where you could stop fighting and just move. "Dance," he said. "I don't." I started, which was a lie. I absolutely dance at the summer kickoff every year, and I could see from his expression that he knew it was a lie. "One song," he said. "Professional courtesy." "How is dancing professional courtesy?" "I'm still waiting on the throw rope recommendation." "I texted you that recommendation 4 days ago." "Did you? I must have missed it." He was grinning now, wide and unrepentant, and I felt my mouth twitch before I could stop it. "One song," I said. The band chose that specific moment to shift into something slower. Of course they did. The fiddle player had apparently decided that this was the moment for a waltz or something waltz adjacent, and Nash took my hand and led me onto the floor with the easy confidence of someone who has never in his life second-guessed a decision, and I thought, fine. Okay, one slow song. That's fine. He danced the way he did everything. Not performing it, just doing it, his hand warm at the small of my back, the other wrapped around mine. Close, without being too close. Present. "You've been avoiding me," he said quietly, low enough that it was just for me. "I've been busy." His hand at my back shifted slightly, just pressure, a small adjustment, and the casual intimacy of it went straight through the professional armor I'd been carefully maintaining. "I'm not going anywhere, Bailey, however long this takes." "However long what takes?" He looked down at me, and this close, I could see exactly how blue his eyes were, which was genuinely unfair, and he said, "You know what?" And the maddening thing, the truly, absolutely maddening thing, was that I did. I knew what. I'd known for a while. Maybe longer than I'd been honest with myself about. "You left," I said. And that was more than I meant to say, but the fiddle had lowered something in me. Or maybe it was his hand at my back, or maybe I was just tired of carrying it around. Every time, "You left. Summer ended, and you left." He didn't flinch. "I know. And you never said anything before you left." "I know that, too." Something moved through his expression. Old regret, the kind that's been sitting somewhere long enough to be quiet. I told myself you were better off without me leaving again. I told myself I was being, I don't know, considerate. That's a very generous word for it. "Yeah," he exhaled. "I'm not leaving this time." The song ended. We stood on the dance floor for a beat longer than we needed to. "Okay," I said. And then, because I was apparently in the business of admitting things tonight, I know. Something shifted in his face, something that looked a lot like relief, and then the band launched into something fast, and the moment dissolved back into fiddle music, and Danny appearing at my elbow with another drink, and Nash took a half step back and let it dissolve. But his hand brushed mine before he stepped away, deliberate and brief, and I thought about it for approximately the rest of the night. Chapter 8. What Paul Did at the Boat Launch. Here's what I should have seen coming. The season was at full tilt by mid-June. Every trip booked, every shuttle running, Danny and Marcus and I trading off the big group floats like a relay team. I was good at the full tilt part. The full tilt part is where I live. No time to overthink anything, no time to sit with the uncomfortable things, just the river and the clients and the next map section. Paul was doing the thing, the pulling back, behaving correctly thing, and I'd let myself feel like maybe the Thursday in the office had been the worst of it. Like the Grant comment was an outlier, a pressure valve moment, and we'd established enough of a shared understanding that it wouldn't happen again. I was wrong. It was a Friday. End of a full week. I had a solo float planned for Saturday morning, my one day off, and I was running through the mental checklist of what I needed from the equipment shed when Paul's truck pulled into the boat launch. Just the two of us. The groups were done. Danny and Marcus had both taken the afternoon shuttle and headed home. I should have left earlier. I know that now. But I had equipment to sort, and the shed was my job, and I wasn't going to not do my job because I'd learned to be slightly wary of my boss. That's not how I operate. He got out of the truck and came toward the shed, and his face was different tonight. The professional correct face was gone. What was underneath it was something I recognized but had been hoping I'd overread, a kind of settled certainty, the look of a man who has decided that the waiting is over. Bailey. He stopped between me and the shed door. Not aggressive. Just, there. Paul, I've got equipment to tag. The trip logs need to match before Monday. That can wait. He took a step forward, and I took one back, and we did this little choreography, until my back found the side of the shed, and I had nowhere else to go. I think you should move, I said. Calm. Careful. I think we should talk. We've talked. Not really. He leaned one arm against the shed wall beside my head, caging me in without touching me. The shed door was 3 feet to my left, and he was between me and it, and the parking lot was empty, and the river went on behind him like nothing was wrong. My heart was doing something loud and specific. This was different from the office. In the office there had been a desk between us. In the office there had been, theoretically, the possibility of other people arriving. This was not fine. I've been patient, he said. Paul, I've given you time. I've respected. And his other hand came up and touched my face. Just his thumb along my jaw, light and proprietorial. What you said you needed. But Bailey, I moved, turned sideways, and pushed past his arm and put 3 steps of distance between us, turning back around because I absolutely was not running. Not from him, not from anyone. Take your hand off me. Even. Clear. And step back. He looked at me. Something moved across his face. Surprise. Then something harder. He'd expected something different. He'd spent months calibrating, expecting a different outcome. You're making this difficult, he said. I am being extremely clear. My voice was steady. I was proud of my voice. The rest of me was not steady at all. I have been clear with you for 8 months. What you just did, I barely touched you, is not okay. And if it happens again, I'm done. The word done cost something. Said out loud. The job, the season, the clients I'd spent years earning. All of it. We clear? He looked at me for a long moment. Crystal, he said. Cold now. The other version of him. He got into his truck and left, and I stood in the empty parking lot with the river going on behind me and my hands shaking. I called Danny. She picked up on the second ring. I need you to come get me, I said, and I need you to not say I told you so until tomorrow at the earliest. On my way, she said, and fine. Tomorrow. I sat on the tailgate of my own truck and watched the river until her headlights came around the bend, and I thought about the grant applications, and the season, and Nash asking me, is everything okay? In a quiet voice in his store, and I thought, no, it's not fine. It hadn't been fine for a while, I'd just been very convincing at pretending otherwise. Chapter 9. The whole truth, told to one person only. I told Nash. Not because I'd planned to, not because I'd decided, sitting on Danny's couch eating the takeout she'd ordered with the calm efficiency of someone who understands that crisis response includes feeding people. I hadn't decided anything. I was actually doing pretty well with the not deciding anything, which was the responsible, adult approach to a situation that needed more thought. What happened was that I went to Clear Creek on Monday morning to return the throw rope I'd borrowed. I'd taken it on my Saturday solo float, conditions warranted it, and I'd texted Nash and he'd said take it and bring it back whenever, and he was alone in the store sorting dry bags, and he took one look at me and said, what happened? And I told him, all of it. The 8 months of it, from the lingering hand on my shoulder to the Grant comment, to Thursday in the office, to the boat launch on Friday. I stood in the middle of Clear Creek Outfitters with the throw rope in my hands and told Nash Blackwood all of it in a steady voice that only broke once, briefly, on the part about the grants, because that was the part where I'd been most scared and the most alone with it. He listened. The whole way through, he listened with his full attention, and he didn't interrupt, and he didn't make the face that some men make when you tell them about another man. That slightly skeptical, let's make sure I'm understanding this face. He just listened. When I was done, he was quiet for a moment. Then he set down the dry bag in his hand, very carefully, like he was being deliberate about keeping his hands occupied. Bailey, he said. I handled it, I said, which was the reflex. I know you did. He moved toward me and stopped about 2 feet away, and his face was, I don't have a good word for it, not angry. deeper than angry, something that had been waiting to be given somewhere to land. "You've been handling it for 8 months alone." "I told Donnie in the last week." "You told Donnie in the last week." Right. He knew me well enough to know the sequence. I didn't want it to be a thing. I looked at the rope in my hands. I thought I could just navigate it, like water, find the line through and come out the other side. And instead it escalated. Yes. He reached out and took the throw rope from my hands. Not because he needed it, but because my hands were doing the tense thing again, and when he took it, our fingers brushed, and I didn't pull away. "I'm going to talk to him," Nash said. "Nash?" Not threateningly. The edge in his voice said that the threat was more of an asterisk than an absence. "But I'm going to talk to him." "That's not... I don't need you to fight my battles." "I know you don't." He looked at me, direct and steady. "This isn't about your battle. Paul Sanders has spent 8 months making you feel like your career is negotiable, based on whether he gets what he wants from you. That's not a thing I can know about and do nothing." The way he said it, not as rescue, not as a man who needed to protect a woman, but as someone who had simply decided that something was not acceptable and was going to say so, hit somewhere complicated behind my ribs. "He might fire me," I said. "He might." Nash held my gaze. Would that be the worst thing? I thought about it. Really thought about it. The job I loved, the season 1, was good at, the clients who came back year after year, and also standing with my back against a shed wall at a boat launch at the end of a long Friday. "No," I said. "Not the worst thing." "Okay." He nodded, like we'd agreed on something. "Do you want to talk about what comes after?" "What do you mean?" "The nonprofit," he said simply. "The grant applications you've been sitting on." I stared at him. "I've been thinking about the outdoor education programming angle for a while," he said. "Clear Creek could host. The equipment is here, the location is here." He paused. "If you were interested in a partner." The word partner was doing a lot of work in that sentence, and we both knew it. He was giving me the professional framing, the one that was legitimate and real, and underneath it was the other thing, the thing from the dance floor, and he was letting me choose which version I wanted to pick up first. "I'll think about it," I said, which was my most honest answer to most Nash-related questions. But I was smiling when I said it. He saw it. His whole face changed. "Good," he said. "That's more than enough." Chapter 10. The part where Nash Blackwood loses his patience. I need to tell you that I did not plan for it to happen in public. In fact, I specifically wanted none of it to happen at all. 2 days after my conversation with Nash, I was running a kayak skills clinic at the Powder Mill boat launch. 6 participants, intermediate level, working on reading current and ferry angles. It was the kind of session I could do with my eyes closed by now, and I was in the good flow of it, the place where the river and the instruction and the physical movement all lined up. Paul's truck pulled into the launch parking lot around 11. He got out. He was in his standard business clothes, not river clothes, not client mode, and he stood at the edge of the lot watching. I registered him the way you register weather on the horizon, noted the position, continued the instruction. The clinic wrapped at noon. Participants loaded boats and headed to their vehicles, talking among themselves, and I was coiling a rope at the water's edge when Paul came down the ramp. "Good session?" Casual. The professional voice. "It was." I kept coiling, eyes on the rope. "I want to talk about Friday." I looked up then. He was closer than I wanted, but we were in a public parking lot, and there were still clinic participants visible, so manageable. Uncomfortable, but manageable. I said everything I needed to say on Friday. I told him. "I don't think you meant it." He said it with a strange certainty. "I think you were scared. I think you..." "Paul, you've been alone for a long time, and you don't know how to." "Paul," sharper, "we're done with this conversation." His expression shifted, and then his hand was on my arm. My forearm, gripping, not hard enough to hurt, but hard enough to be unmistakable, and I went very still in the way you go still when you're deciding what to do next. I heard the crunch of gravel from the lot above before I saw anything. Nash came down the ramp at a walk that was somehow both entirely unhurried and completely purposeful, and every inch of him was the kind of still that meant the opposite of calm. He'd been on the road above. I found out later he'd been dropping off a rental client at the launch. Coincidence that was not a coincidence. This town is 800 people, and he'd seen. "Take your hand off her," he said. His voice was level, almost quiet, which was worse, somehow, than if he'd shouted. Paul turned. He looked at Nash with the expression of a man sizing up an argument he thinks he can win. Nash was taller than him. Nash was younger than him. Nash was also, right now, operating on something that had nothing to do with size. "This is a private conversation," Paul said. "She told you to let go." Nash stopped about 5 feet away. "Do it." Paul released my arm. He turned fully toward Nash, and the decision moved across his face. The calculation of a man who's been used to winning physical space arguments because he's large and certain. "You got some kind of stake in this, boy?" The boy was specific. Targeted. Nash was 31 and 6'2" and had been doing physical labor in the Ozarks since before Paul Sanders discovered Eminence existed. Nash said nothing. Looked at Paul with those quiet eyes. "Back off," Paul said, and he put a hand on Nash's chest. "I want to be accurate here." Nash didn't swing first. He gave Paul a full 2 seconds after that hand landed. 2 actual seconds, I counted, because I was standing there watching it happen and also had gone entirely still in the way of a person trying to be invisible while also being completely present. And in those 2 seconds his expression didn't change at all, and then he removed Paul's hand from his chest, stepped forward, and said something in Paul's ear low and specific that I couldn't hear. Paul threw the first punch. It didn't connect cleanly. Nash moved. Not much. A partial turn. The kind of economy of motion that meant he'd been in enough situations to know how bodies work in them. And Paul's fist caught the side of Nash's jaw instead of his face. Nash, for the record, did not look particularly surprised. What happened next was fast and physical, and I am not a person who enjoys violence. But I will tell you that watching Nash Blackwood put Paul Sanders on the ground in approximately 3 seconds flat, in the manner of someone who knew exactly what they were doing and did it without theatrics, with one of the kayak clinic participants filming on his phone from the lot, that is a thing that happened. Paul was on the pavement. Nash was standing. "Get up if you want," Nash said, still quiet, "or don't." Paul, to his credit, stayed down. He was breathing and uninjured, mostly, just put on the ground by someone 10 younger than him. The clinic participant put his phone away. Nash turned and looked at me. "You okay?" he said. I looked at Nash standing there with Paul on the ground and a mark on his jaw starting to show, and I had several competing feelings doing several different things, and the one that came out of my mouth was, "Your jaw." "It's fine. Nash. Bailey." He closed the distance between us, and his hand came up and cupped my face, gentle and certain, tilting my head up so I was looking at him. "Are you okay?" "Yes. It came out smaller than I meant it to." "Okay?" His thumb moved along my cheekbone once, and he let go. "Then we're going to call the county sheriff's office and file a report. Both of us. And you're going to tell them about the 8 months before today. The job is not more important than you." I looked at him for a long moment. Behind us, Paul was getting to his feet with the energy of a man who was having significant reconsidering of several life choices. "Paul," Nash said without looking at him, "I'd get in your truck and go home, and I'd call a lawyer on the way." Paul got in his truck and went home. I stood on the boat launch ramp in the June sunshine with my hands shaking slightly, and Nash Blackwood beside me and the current river going about its business behind us, clear and cold and utterly indifferent to human drama, as rivers correctly are. "Okay," I said, "the sheriff's office." "Yeah, and then we're going to have a conversation." He looked at me. Something in him settled, the last of the controlled fury going quiet. "We are a real one, he agreed. I picked up my rope and started toward the lot. Nash fell into step beside me, close enough that our arms brushed, and didn't say anything else. Sometimes you don't need words. Sometimes you just need someone to match your stride. Chapter 11, What Actually Needs Saying. The sheriff's deputy was thorough, which I appreciated. The kayak clinic participants' phone footage was thorough too, which was an unexpected development in everyone's afternoon. Paul did not contest the report. I later found out, through Lorraine Pacheco naturally, who has a nose for these things, that he'd called a lawyer from his truck exactly the way Nash told him to. Donnie cried when I told her, the productive kind of crying, the kind that happens when something that's been under pressure finally releases. She cried, and then she made a comprehensive plan for the business going forward that included, I quote, "You running that nonprofit by October if I have to personally drive you to the grant offices in Jefferson City." Marcus said, "Huh, glad Blackwood was there. which was Marcus in his entirety on the subject, and honestly, it was plenty. I took 2 days. Not hiding, I'm constitutionally opposed to hiding, but processing. I ran the river both mornings, early, when the mist was still in the water, and it was just me and the current and the herons and Riptide on the bank, keeping pace. The river is where I think it always has been. What I thought about was Nash. Specifically, Nash in the store, looking at the map with his hands braced on the counter and his arm 2 inches from mine. Nash at the dance with his hand at my back saying, "I'm not leaving this time." Nash on the boat launch with his hand cupping my face, asking if I was okay. I thought about the word wound, not in a dramatic way, more in the way you poke a bruise to see if it's healed. The thing that had made me circle Nash for years without landing, the thing that had let me call it professional and complicated and bad timing for a decade. He left. That was the simple version. Every summer he left, and I'd watch him go and talk myself out of whatever I'd spent the summer not admitting, and after enough years of that, you get good at the not admitting part. I went to Clear Creek on Thursday morning, 7:30, before the store opened. I knocked. Nash opened the door in yesterday's clothes, which meant he'd been there early or stayed late or both, and he looked at me for a second with the expression of someone recalibrating. "Hey." His voice had that just morning quality. "Hey." I held up the bag I was carrying. "June's cinnamon rolls. They're still warm." He stepped back to let me in. The store was quiet and smelled like cedar and the faint good smell of new gear. He'd been doing inventory. Boxes open on the counter, a legal pad with notes in his handwriting. We sat on the stools at the counter and ate June's cinnamon rolls and didn't talk for a minute, which was its own kind of conversation. "I owe you an apology," I said. He looked at me. "Not for the recent stuff, that was a situation and you helped, and I'm grateful." I picked at the edge of my roll. "For before, the years of before. I made things complicated when they didn't need to be complicated, because it was easier to call it complicated than to, Bailey. Let me finish. I'm doing a thing." The corner of his mouth moved. He let me finish. "You said at the dance that you didn't say anything because you thought leaving was better for me. And I've been thinking about that." I looked up. I did the same thing but the other direction. I told myself it was better to keep it where it was, to not say anything, because it never seemed like the right time and you were always leaving and I didn't want to. I stopped. Found the actual words. I didn't want to want something I couldn't keep. The store was very quiet. "Bailey," he said my name the way he always said it. Like it was 2 words he liked. "I'm not going anywhere." I know. And I did know, now. Bone deep. The way you know water temperature before you put your hand in. That's why I'm here. He reached across the counter and his hand covered mine on the cinnamon roll bag, and this time neither of us moved away from it. "Can I say something?" he asked. "Yes. I've been in love with you since I was 20 years old. Approximately. Give or take." The cinnamon roll bag crinkled under our hands. Outside, the river was out there doing its thing. A car went past on the main road. "Give or take," I said. "Maybe 19. I was a little slow on the uptake. Nash Blackwood. Slow on the uptake. I felt the smile happening. Couldn't stop it. "I've never heard of such a thing." "Only with you." He said it simply. "Only ever with you. There's a thing that happens on the river sometimes when you've been fighting current for a long stretch and you come around a bend and the water opens up wide and calm ahead of you, and the relief of it is almost physical. You feel yourself unclench, your paddle goes light in your hands. That's what happened to me, sitting on a stool at the Clear Creek counter at 7:30 on a Thursday morning. I turned my hand over under his so our palms were together. "I might be difficult," I said, "historically. I've noticed, and I jump into things without thinking them through. I've also noticed that, multiple times, usually from water. Nash, Bailey, I'm trying to tell you something." He squeezed my hand. "I know. I'm listening. I think I've been..." The word was right there and I'd been dodging it for years, and I was done dodging it. "I've been in love with you for a long time, and I'd very much like to stop pretending that I haven't been." The quiet that followed was the good kind. The full kind. The kind that happens when something that's been circling finally lands. Nash Blackwood got off his stool, came around the counter, and stood in front of me. He put both hands on my face this time. Gentle, the same way he'd done at the boat launch but different. All the urgency gone from it, just steady and certain, and tilted my face up. "Hi," he said quietly. "Hi." My voice came out soft. He kissed me. Soft at first. Careful, like he was checking. And then not soft at all. And I had been waiting for that for approximately a decade without knowing how much I was waiting, and it turned out the answer was a lot, quite a lot. When we came up for air, his forehead was resting on mine and his hands were still at my face, and I had both of mine fisted in the front of his shirt like I was holding on against current. "The cinnamon rolls are getting cold," I said. He laughed, actually laughed, right against my forehead, warm and real. "Bailey O'Connell," he said, "I have been waiting 10 years for this moment, and you're worried about the cinnamon rolls. June makes good cinnamon rolls. She really does." He sat back on his stool and pulled mine closer so our knees were touching, and we ate June's cinnamon rolls at the Clear Creek Outfitters counter, with the river outside the windows doing what rivers do, which is go on and go on and go on. Epilogue, River Notes. Some things happen fast, and some things take 10 years. The Ozark Youth River Initiative, that's what we called it, and yes, I know it's a mouthful, Danny is working on a better name, got its first grant in October. 2 grants, actually, one from the State Outdoor Recreation Fund and one from a private foundation in St. Louis, whose board member had apparently read an op-ed in the Kansas City Star about therapeutic outdoor programming for at-risk youth. Nash co-signed the application as hosting partner. Clear Creek Outfitters is officially the gear and logistics home base for the program, which means I'm in Nash's store approximately 4 days a week, for professional reasons, which is very efficient. Donnie is now head guide for the program's water component, and could not be smug about it in a way that was more pointed if she tried. She tries. She's great at it. Marcus said, good program. Same energy as the Nash assessment. Consistent man. Paul Sanders did not fight the complaint. He sold Eminence Adventures in September to a woman named Carla Wheaton from Springfield, who has very good operational instincts and an immediate understanding that you do not mess with your guides, and who hired Danny and Marcus back on the spot and has so far left me professional messages about the nonprofit partnership that are genuinely pleasant to receive. So that worked out. Riptide, my 3-legged healer, has decided that Nash is acceptable and demonstrates this by sitting on his feet whenever he's at the apartment. Nash feeds him biscuits from June's diner, which is, look, I'm not going to say it's manipulation, but I'm also not going to say it's not. The kitten Nash talked me down from the tree to save, still at Mrs. Alvarez's house. Her name is Maple. She is enormous and imperious and has never shown a moment's gratitude to either of us. Cats. Here's the thing about the river. Here's the thing I tell my float clients. The nervous ones. The ones standing on the bank looking at the water like it's something that might consume them. Current is not the enemy. Current is information. It tells you where to go if you know how to read it. And yes, sometimes you go over a drop wrong. And yes, sometimes you end up swimming. And yes, sometimes you need someone on the bank with a throw rope and a steadier head than yours. That's not failure. That's the river. That's how it works. You get back in the boat, you read the water ahead, you paddle. On the last Sunday of October, Nash and I ran the full current river length together. Just the two of us, solo kayaks, the way we both like it best. The maples had gone orange, and the oaks were holding their last gold, and the water was so clear you could see every rock below the surface, the way you can only see it in late autumn when the summer silt has settled. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. We knew the river, both of us, knew which side to take through which sections, and we moved through it in the easy rhythm of people who've paid attention to the same things for a long time. At Blue Spring, that impossible blue, the color of no place else on earth, Nash pulled his kayak alongside mine, and we drifted for a minute in the current, shoulders touching. "Hey," he said. "Hey, you good?" I looked at the spring. At the water. At the October sky above the river canyon, that particular Ozark blue that has no equivalent anywhere else I've been. "Yeah," I said, and meant it in every direction. "I'm good." His hand found mine between our kayaks and held on, and the current took us gently around the bend.